Welcome to this episode of the Level Design Podcast, in which we shoot fascists in the face with the help of machine games, Mitja Roskaric. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome everyone. It's been a little while since we've recorded an episode, but for you, the dear listener, will be no time at all. But for us, a lot has happened since the last time we recorded. So welcome one and all. Today in this episode we have the wonderful Jonathan Wilson from Hangar 13.
Hello.
The ravishing Rob McLaughlin from the Chinese Room. We have a new co-host, which is Valentina Chrysostomu, who was on a previous episode. Welcome, Valentina.
Hi everyone, I'm glad to be here.
We have the wonderful Mitja Roskaric from Machine Games. Welcome, Mitja.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
The last game you worked on was Youngblood, right? But you've got a hell of a career, Mitja, haven't you? How did you start out in this thing called level design?
It was quite difficult growing up in Slovenia, which is a fairly small country. But I had a passion to make video games since I was about 12 years old. Mm-hmm. Didn't know how to do it, but I went and did the closest thing to making games, which was programming. So I went to the high school that focuses on programming, attended the computer science university, and dropped out at the first chance that I got to go work in video games.
You were like, that's why I'm here, to make video games, not to do
stuff. So I actually started as a level scripter. It was a good way to get into the industry.
So from then you went on to Line Game Line as well, right?
That is correct.
They did Payday 2, right?
Yeah, we worked on post-launch content for Payday 2. Mm-hmm. And we worked on Raid World War II, which was a Payday 2 inspired game, but set during the Second World War.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so 4-player co-op as well.
I think those are very interesting games, like the bank heist games, like which I think Payday is kind of, basically you can describe it as a bank heist game, right?
It was very, very interesting game to play and work on. I actually didn't hear about it until I got the chance to go work on it. Mm-hmm. But it was quite a big challenge with being able to play the game solo or 2 or 3 players, being able to stealth or go loud, and there was also a lot of random elements in the maps. I learned quite a lot of things working on Payday 2.
All those games I always find really that you have such different play styles in it, especially when it's multiplayer. There's so many different layers that you got to think about at the same time. That is basically you have to have a quantum design. You know, it's like finite state. You know, infinite states, not finite states, but infinite states that you could possibly be ranking players up, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of play styles, and also different players enjoy different things, right? So it was quite a challenge to make everyone happy.
How do you make everyone happy?
Yeah, I try.
And from then on, you went for Sperasoft. That's in St. Petersburg, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I got the chance to go and work on Rainbow Six Siege, also post-launch content. I really hope to be able to work on a PvP map for Siege, but I didn't get the chance in the time I was there.
Right.
I did work on the special event. It was called Mission Outbreak, which was again a 3-player co-op event against aliens.
Okay, so like I seem to have missed a lot about some of these games, because you're telling me like Rainbow Six Siege against aliens.
Yes, there was a special event. It was on for about a couple of weeks.
Uh-huh.
So you were able to team up with 2 other players, and you played. There were 3 maps. I worked on the hospital that also had a veterans home area. Destructibility, the destruction was still there from the PvP. Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting. And the Ubisoft actually announced last E3, I think, they are now releasing a full game based on that event. So it was supposed to launch this February. I guess it was pushed back a bit, but It will come out sometime this year. It's called Rainbow Six Quarantine.
Oh,
Which is
wow.
a bit unfortunate considering current events.
That
Yeah.
sounds unfortunate.
And then from then on, you went to Remedy.
That is also correct.
You were there for about, like, what, a year or something? Back in...
Roughly, yeah. And although I was interviewing to work on Control, as it happens often in game development, when I started, I was asked that they need help on Crossfire 2, the campaign for the upcoming FPS game. And I said I have no issue with that, so my time at Remedy was spent on Crossfire 2, which was also a fun project to work on. It was my first single-player first-person shooter game.
And that's quite a change, because, like, so far you've kind of worked on all these multiplayer maps, right?
Yeah, so even though I never really played that many co-op games, I now developed 6 of them. So
Oh yeah, it's a lot.
It's like now you're going to start doing much more single player. You're going to be like, oh, screw that. I'm going to just do, like, multiplayer gaming at home, you know?
I mean, you can find interesting things in any kind of game, right? I mean, if I was asked to work on a racing game, I think I could find things that make it interesting to me as well.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think is the biggest difference between a multiplayer level versus a single player level?
Oh, single player, it's just about that experience, working with the assumption that most people will play it only one time, and ensuring that they stick to the game because there is so much competition. So keeping the players engaged throughout the journey they take. It's a lot of, like, pacing considerations, introducing new elements in the levels, changing up things enough. Like, a good example of this would be Titanfall 2. I think a lot of people would agree that it was one of the best single-player campaigns of the past few years.
I had a really good feeling about that and really enjoyed it, but I have to be honest, I don't remember a lot of it. You know, it's just, I think it's you got so much into the flow of this time switching and being in it. I don't remember it as much as levels like Dishonored or things like that. Maybe it's time for Mark to play more.
I think because it was also a very short game, I think you could finish it in about 4 hours.
That's true.
It was quite short, but I still remember all the major events happening. Are you sure you didn't play drunk, Mark?
Yeah, I did a speed run, right?
I think, like, when you say you remember Dishonored more, that's probably just because you were in that world longer. Like with Titanfall, it's definitely the set pieces and stuff that you're more likely to remember. But once again, like we said, it is a much shorter experience, and, like, it all goes by quite quickly. And to the counterpart, Dishonored's a very meaty kind of in-depth game where you will get lost for hours.
Yeah, with Titanfall 2, you get the impression they got all these amazing gameplay ideas and they just throw them at you again and again and again. And by the end of it, you're just thinking, my God, how do they come up with all these things and implement them so well?
When it comes to considerations for a multiplayer map, though, it's more about making sure that people who play it for the first time and people who play it for the 100th time have the same amount of fun. Multiplayer maps should be, like, very easy to understand, so newcomers don't get discouraged, and they should also have a lot of depth, so there's always new areas to discover, new corners, new, like, ninja pads, as we call them. A lot focus on the depth of the map.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because you will be playing it over and over and over again.
When you're playing multiplayer maps, I mean, just a very old example, with Quake and Quake 2, the sort of trick jumping community went kind of mainstream, and you found that most people who played the maps would trick jump around them, and they'd move around the maps a lot faster than I guess was designed, and they'd do trick jumps and stuff. And certainly when I watch someone playing a Titanfall 2 map, the level of movement, experienced player, the level of movement that they bring to their play style is just flabbergasting. To what extent do you feel that with a multiplayer map that you kind of have to be a master of the gameplay yourself, and how can you anticipate how people are going to play it, 6 months from when you make it, or a year, or 5 years.
It definitely helps to be a good player of multiplayer games, and also have knowledge of variety of different multiplayer games. But you don't have to be the best player around, right? There will always be people who find things that you never expected, and that also applies to single player games. You just have to have that ground foundation in multiplayer. Like, you have to understand how people think when they play a multiplayer map. So if you play a lot of Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, you know that there are differences between those games, and when you're working on your game, depending on what it is, you need to be able to argument the decisions you make, and to be able to do that well, you need that foundation of playing multiplayer games, I think.
I think it's kind of interesting talking about Call of Duty, because that's kind of, like, in more recent editions, has really leaned into the idea of it being a kind of e-sport, even though it's like shooting at each other is essentially an e-sport, is a game. Like, even the maps are now like arenas rather than this is a battlefield. It's more like, hey, this is an arena, you're going to go and shoot each other.
The only thing I can say about the most recent Call of Duty, I played quite a bit of multiplayer. I enjoyed it as like a game, as a hobby, coming home from work, and knowing that I will have a good time with it because the core gameplay was very solid. There was also always something to work towards. Can't really comment about it as an esport though. Not sure if it's popular or not really.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't been quite into that. But I think that's something we should investigate about the world of esports, because I'm not really into that side of competitive playing. I just meant more that in the themes of the game itself, of the multiplayer maps, it was like, yeah, this is a gaming arena. Like they are being quite obvious about it. They're not, pretending it's a, you're being attacked by aliens or anything like that. It says like, it's like, no, this is, red versus blue. Go shoot each other in the face.
I think the reason they want that is so it can be, like Mika mentioned, it can be that like pick up and play experience. You can come home from work, you can kind of switch off, and you can log in and know, because it has such a solid foundation, you're going to have a good time with it. And your expectations are already there, and it's going to satisfy that like half-hour play session you want to have, or longer if you choose to. So it's very good to have that kind of like jump in kind of game, and not something you have to be super invested in over and over again.
I would say it falls somewhere in the middle. If we look at a scale where we have Counter-Strike or Valorant at one end, and then we have Battlefield or a Rising Storm, for example, on the other end, Call of Duty is somewhere in between. It's not like as abstracted as the Valorant maps, for example, or Counter-Strike, which don't really make sense as places, at least if we look at the older maps. But on the other hand, it's not like about creating this Warzone fantasy as Battlefield does. Just they're trying to create a bit different experience.
That is really fascinating. The way that, like you say, the maps become abstracted is a kind of almost like a sort of process of natural selection, particularly with a game as old as Counter-Strike, where particularly with when vote map switching came in, that you would get the community would decide what maps it enjoyed playing, the maps which suited the meta best. So you would get servers, back in the day, you'd get just Dust, Dust. And then later on you get Dust 2, Dust 2, Dust 2, Dust 2. And it was that sort of shifting style of play that people started playing Counter-Strike and then thought, well, actually, what I really want to do is almost deathmatch it. So I want to play Dust because it is literally 25 seconds before I'm going to see the enemy. And I can run in there with the P90 if I really want to. I'm not forced to play in a cautious way. I can, like you say, come home from work, jump onto Counter-Strike and be playing really sort of intense the intense gameplay that I want straight away. And then you could even say it goes further than that, because then you get map types like the FY maps. That happens in other games as well, that people, they distill down the kind of gameplay that they want, and it can be taken to such an extreme that all it is you spawn and there's almost a person under your crosshairs immediately, and all it is it goes right down to just shooting, just moving your mouse a minuscule amount, twitch shooting, sniping again and again and again, and speeding up that gameplay loop faster and faster and faster, because that is the kind of thing that really people love. That's the sort of endorphin rush that they really enjoy the most. So those mods become more and more popular, and then you get the more chilled out people who sort of maybe even move to like surf maps, and all they want to do is chill out with their friends and just do sort of flowing moves, the kind of sort of stoner map style. This is really fascinating how the community sort of splits and splinters, and some people move towards the more esport end, some people move towards the Twitch end, and yeah.
Speaking of chilling in multiplayer games, though, how much would you say that a multiplayer game is made for people who are inexperienced with first-person shooters? Because I feel like a lot of those multiplayer games are not made for casual players. When you first jump into a multiplayer game, you'll probably die within the first couple minutes, and then if you're not a very
you have to get good, right?
Very quickly as well.
Exactly. So what kind of audience do you believe it serves? Any multiplayer game, like, it feels like it's always around the same audience. How can we bring in more people for those kind of games, for first person shooters especially?
I think it depends on the game, right? Valorant seems as an example that wants to bring in the hardcore audience. But on the other end, you have Overwatch, and even though I never played it, I hear a lot of people talking about that it's very casual friendly. It's easy to jump in, and you don't have to have good aim to be able to be good at it. You can be a support player and still do well for your team. I'm not sure if any of you played Overwatch.
Just a little bit.
Not that much.
I've played it a little bit, and I would kind of agree with it. When I played it, because I didn't do rank or anything like that, I just had it as that like pick up and play game. I could just come home, pick a character, jump into a game, have a few rounds, and it was good fun. It was like arcadey action, and I didn't feel like I was bad by not playing it religiously like everyone else was. So I still felt like I had a fighting chance. So I feel like that's like Overwatch is a kind of good barrier to entry if you're looking for a more casual player. Just don't do ranks or seasons or anything like that, because then you might get destroyed.
And do you think this has given the rise to the PUBG and Fortnite type maps, which are, yes, you can be really good, but also you can be really lucky and be last man standing? I think I've gotten to like nearly the end of can't remember, PUBG map, and I didn't do anything. I just happened to
have a chance, yeah.
I just hid,
I think it's the same with Apex too, because I remember when I first started playing that, the ring wasn't powerful enough to kill you. So you could just hang behind and refill your health a little bit and just hide, and you could just hide and then win the match just by shooting the last person if your aim was good. But yeah, afterwards they patched it up a bit and got better. So some of those games, like the Battle Royale ones too, are a little bit dangerous to design, I guess.
I think the rise of Battle Royale is definitely a fascinating thing to look into, especially from a map design point of view, given it's a level that starts really large and gradually gets smaller as you play. And it's still got to be usable for the entire game, right? Even if it does come down to that 1v1 in this tiny little spot on a map. So like shrinking maps are definitely a fascinating thing.
Can I ask a really dumb question, and I will give up my level designer creds right now. It's right that in PUBG and Fortnite the center always changes, right? So you have so it's not always like the same city, right? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I can give up my level design gamer creds now, because I was like thinking, well, that would be like really easy to to spoof, right? It's like, run to that building.
That would not be great now.
Yeah.
It does touch a bit on what you were saying earlier, Mitja, about how like the Battlefield games, they generally create a real location.
Yeah.
that then allow gameplay to play in. And I guess that PUBG also does that. They make a sort of facsimile of a real place, and they may put in some broad brush hint to what the gameplay should be, but it's not finely crafted. What's your experience in working with the sort of varying requirements there?
If your question is more about like creating realistic environments versus more abstract ones,
yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
it completely depends on the project, right? Recently, industry is shifting more and more towards creating realistic environments, realistic buildings, and so forth. And although a lot of players complain that like for level design it's not the best, I still feel that we can create a cool gameplay inside those locations, but it's a bigger challenge because you have an extra consideration to think about. Back in the 90s, when you were able to be abstract with your environments, you just focus on making things that will make the gameplay fun, right, and engaging.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's this other consideration on top of it, and you have to be able to explain how these buildings make sense in the world you created. But it's not in a way of creating engaging gameplay, right? There's a lot of games that have fairly realistic environments and still have engaging gameplay, like Rainbow Six Siege, for example. Of course, they have some artistic liberties where all the doorways and windows are just, open. There's no actual doors on the doorways, but they are able to create some engaging gameplay in those realistic locations. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose it also gives a hook to the new players that Valentina was talking about, because they have a point of reference where they can go, well, based on my architectural or cultural experience, I can guess where this is going to go.
I would agree with that point. It's easier to get yourself immersed. It's easier to quickly understand the environment, right? In a multiplayer game, one of other considerations is being able to communicate with your teammates, right? So if you see, I'm in the kitchen, the enemy is in the living room, that's very easy to communicate, right? But if you have an abstract environment, hey, I'm in the pink room and the enemy is on the disco ball, it gets a bit crazy.
The wonderful names that people come up with for things in maps, and when you watch esports in Counter-Strike, for example, and these weird names that people have
banana
parts of maps. Yeah, banana. And you're thinking, the person who came up with that, the people on some server, probably East Coast of America, 10 years ago, who first started calling it banana, and now everyone is. It's really wonderful to me that kind of thing grows organically out of it.
I think even in a fantasy world, though, in a fantasy map, you can still find realism. So I'm not sure if realism is what gets in the way of like fun exactly, because you could create that fantasy world which is not exactly what you're used to, but then you could lay out the map in a way that is what you said, Mitja, easy to understand and it has depth, so you could get used to it. It could be realistic for the world it's themed at, in its own universe. But at the same time, we're not talking about little tiny details that make it ultra realistic and get in your way of actually playing. Because I think those are the ones that don't make the gameplay fun, if you get what I mean.
I understand the gist of what you said. When creating believable environments for more fantasy settings, then it's all about consistency, the internal consistency of the world you created. Because you can still have real physics and everything, then you have to stick to it, right? If everything is grounded, don't have floating platforms anywhere.
I think one of the and again is a unpopular opinion is, for example, Half-Life, when you suddenly go to Zen, right? It's like you've been in a realistic thing, and of course, it's excused, but I think that's the kind of disjoin there that at the time people were a bit like, wait, what? Suddenly I'm in Zen and I'm like doing this platforming thing, and I think even the first traversal puzzle there is jumping from platform to platform in 3D space. And I remember there being a lot of complaints because we suddenly went from this grounded game to, well, aliens and floating platforms. But unpopular opinion, I know.
Apparently it was built very, very quickly. Or at the end of development, they didn't have much time left. They were in extreme crunch, and they did it over the course of 2 weeks or something. Unbelievable effort.
Mitja, you've been working in AAA for what, more than a decade now?
Yeah, I started in, what was it, 2008, something like that.
If you gave some advice to you 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, what would be your best advice about working in the AAA side of level design?
In general, I feel a lot of people are not aware how important soft skills are when working in a studio with other people. When you're working alone at home making maps for other games like Counter-Strike or modding something, you're working alone, and of course you need a lot of technical knowledge, and this technical knowledge is still important working in AAA. But I feel soft skills and being able to work with other people are even more important than that, because it takes hundreds of people nowadays to make a AAA game, and doesn't matter how good one person is, it's more like how the whole team works together. So I think that's like one of the biggest pieces of advice for younger developers.
Don't get lost on the technical, for sure. It's like you say, Mika, like the soft skills, you've been doing this for like over 10 years. Like having those soft skills refined makes it easier, even just moving studios and working with new teams as well. If you come in with them already developed, at least you're going to have a better time getting integrated with the team.
Yeah, I mean, it's after one editor, it's not really that hard anymore to learn another.
Yeah.
It gets faster and faster.
That's kind of like what I was going to ask, because obviously you've worked for quite a few different companies, and I'm assuming just from the look of the portfolio, they all use proprietary tech. I don't think they're using third-party editors.
That is correct, and I have no experience with Unity or Unreal or CryEngine, but I have.
So you've always used like bespoke tech, like in-house engines when you've worked at these studios?
Yeah, it's also nice to be able to see different engines, get different insights on how people think about things, because all these editors were built differently, people use them differently.
A lot of them are always built for the style of game they're making, right? So that's why certain studios really, their engine does something really well, and then another studio's like, well, why can't mine do that?
Yeah,
I agree with you. I kind of find it fascinating when you play all these different games, or you see them, and they all look so differently, and it is usually just down because they've put the effort into building their own tech, which is always very impressive to see.
It's quite a big effort, though.
Yeah, I mean, building your own software for that. I think it's been interesting. We've been talking about multiplayer games, we talk about single player games, but we've kind of missed out the one in the middle, which you've worked on, Mitja, which is Youngblood, which is out of the box co-op game with no excuse about it being a kind of co-op game, right?
It is a 2-player co-op game, but that you can play alone as well.
Well, yes, you can play alone, but it's like it's kind of geared to
it's.
I mean, story wise, and it's kind of nice to see a game that's like, no, literally, mate, it's two of you. That's a kind of challenge there for level design, isn't it?
Co-op always adds extra challenges for sure. The way I like to explain it to people who never worked on co-op before is, if you have 2 players, it's not twice the amount of work, but more like 3 times the amount of work.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider if the game has drop in and drop out at any time and so forth. It's
True.
A lot of considerations, right? So suddenly your partner disconnects, now you're with AI, the game still needs to keep working. You can't expect from the player to restart the level just because of that. So it's a lot of considerations. On Youngblood, we had to make sure that every encounter and puzzle and platforming section can work with your AI partner as well. Sometimes we had quite crazy ideas for co-op interactions, but sadly, because of those considerations, we couldn't implement them.
It's because it's like, no, honestly, now you have to be working with somebody, because if they drop out, you're now stuck across this side of the bridge.
Like, oh, we're making a co-op game and we want to have really fun co-op events in the game, right? But then it's always this, but what if? Like, that's our work, basically. A ton of what ifs, and how do we solve that? And
yep.
I was doing a level today, and it was like, I can tell you, it was just basically set on an island, and the goal is to do nothing. I'm on holiday at the moment, by the way, and since we're in a bit of a lockdown, I created my own beach scene that I can go into. So the goal is to do nothing. And even then, I was going like, yeah, but what if players swam out too far? Because then the land ends, right? The sea goes on, because it's just a plane that goes on for infinity. But, like, the land underneath it ends. And then I started arguing with myself, and then realizing that I was making this game for myself. So the easy solution is not to go there.
Yeah, it's just stop them.
Yeah.
So, for example, for Youngblood, because it's primarily or more like focused on the co-op, would you say that some of the things that you implemented there or like created for it, for the level design, was it a lot different than a single player game, and how much would the level design department have can influence like the game design department? Can you change the rules because something doesn't work in the game when there's 2 players? How do those departments communicate?
To answer the first question, the primary considerations were the sizes of the rooms, because with extra player around, we wanted to ensure that it's comfortable to move around the combat arenas and the alleyways, right? So that was more impacted on the level design and environment art side. When it comes to game design considerations, there were a lot of examples where on the level design side we would implement a boss fight, and we didn't consider how it would play in co-op, and then we had to get game design involved and AI teams as well, because when there's 2 players it's kind of easy to break the boss, right? So we had to have systems in place that he won't focus on one player, and even if the player is close, and not to be able to, how do you say, cheese the boss, like abuse the systems. So there were a lot of cases where it was kind of easier to break the game because there was another player to consider all the time.
And going back to the realism thing we were talking about before, you talked about rooms. For example, if you walked, I don't know, into a restaurant kitchen, now that there's 2 players, maybe you won't have 3 kitchen benches there. Maybe you'll have 1, so the players can move around. But maybe that won't make it look as detailed or realistic. Is that also something you had to consider?
Luckily, the game is set in alternate history, right? So there's some like artistic flexibility there. So I can't remember there was ever any case where we had to redesign a location because it didn't feel realistic or believable.
I mean, it's fantastical anyway. I mean, some of the stuff that I did like about Youngblood was there was, I think, in the beginning on the Zeppelin, you kind of go on the outside and it's giving you a kind of look ahead of what you're going to be challenged with, but then kind of stops it because you then go inside and something kind of completely different happens. But as a player, it's like, oh, I know what's going to happen because I can see through the window and I can see the bad guys through the window, and I go inside, and the level design kind of forces you inside. I'm not sure if I'm complete. I will draw a diagram on Twitter for people to understand what I'm talking about. But.
And luckily we also have a lot of destruction in the game, so when it comes to kitchen tables and chairs, we can place on them, and as soon as a bullet hits them, they will like break apart. So that helped as well.
Oh, I like that. It's like, that damn furniture is in the way. Just blow it up. It's fine. But having worked and played all these games, it's like, as a level designer, if it's your job, how do you balance that? Because if you go home and go like, right, I'm working on a co-op map, but tonight I should be playing some multiplayer maps. How do you get this a better work-life balance? What do you do to get your head rested and invigorated to do what you do, Mitja?
It's very important considerations, especially as a young developer. It's easy to fall into the trap to be always like switched on and after work play games for research all the time. So I learned it the hard way, that I have to take breaks, even though I still tend to play games almost on a daily basis. Most of the time I avoid playing games for purpose of research. It still happens though, right? I still wanna check out things, how other games that are similar to the game I'm working on do their things. But I try to be careful about that. Try to find things that are very easy to jump in, like I mentioned Call of Duty before, right? And nice thing to do for me is also to replay some older titles that I enjoyed. At the moment I'm replaying the Tomb Raider reboot, for example. It's a fun game, 7 years old, but still fun to play through.
I still need to kind of replay that one. I played quite a bit of it, but I was playing it at the same time as Last of Us, and it became that I was tired of being muddy and dirty in a virtual environment. So I go like, oh, I'll stop playing Last of Us. Right, Lara. Oh, you're dirty and about to kill some other people. Just so they kind of felt the same. And the two worlds kind of started merging a little bit.
I also pay more attention to, even though I'm quite an introvert and I like my alone time, I, not right now during quarantine, but in normal times, make sure to occasionally have lunch or dinner together with some of my coworkers, spend some time with them outside of work. We also went to the cinema together couple of months back, so just doing things outside the work that are not job related.
I think it's important to find that kind of like break point. It's like, it's all well and good, like we play games a lot, we make games every day, but we have to be able to draw that line. Something like a lot of people ask about now, or I find younger developers asking about, is stuff like burnout and like how do you avoid it. And it's stuff like Meek is talking about. It, you need to have that line of doing something different and switching off and not bringing the work home with you. Still not found the perfect solution or answer to it, because I don't think there is one. It ultimately comes down to you as an individual, and you have to manage your time.
I think the important thing is to be able to recognize when it's getting bad.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I can still fall in the trap, but I learned to see the signals, right? And I know this is enough, I need a break. At the start of my career, it was just like it kept going until it was too late, and then
I think it's very difficult for young developers to fall into that trap, because you want to learn, you want to prove yourself, you just want to be always there for the game, I guess, and then you get burned out and you get tired, and I think you start maybe even hating the games you're working on or the games you're playing. So it's a trap for sure.
So Google have something similar, which is this idea of 80-20, in which like 20% of your time can be dedicated to a project. And I think some of the idea of that is to allow people not to burn out. I mean, I run a small company, so I can do what the hell I like. But in bigger companies, if you've got technical leads and stuff like that, for example, I wouldn't expect my people to go home and play a game if it's related to their day job, right? That should be part of
your day job.
Your job. Your day job, right? It'll be like, well, what are you doing? They're playing, I don't know, Call of Duty. It's like, oh, because I'm trying to figure out how they do something. And in this industry specifically, that's not like a sitting around playing. It's like, that's literally how you're going to do it. It's like being a web designer and being on the web. It's like, what are you doing? Looking how they did this on this website. No, don't do that. Just get back to writing the stuff. It's like, well, no, you have to.
Yeah, there has to be time spent doing other things than your actual work tasks. So you need time for research and development, and even some companies offer like the whole Friday to work on your project or work from home or just do something different that is, it's you time. It's better for the company too, because you just refresh and then you're able to get back into it again.
But also, some of those Google projects, right, became projects. I mean, yes, there is, later on, there's a graveyard of Google projects, which I presume came out of this, but Hangouts, Google Chat, Google Wave, which we can wave goodbye at, was also like stuff that came out of these like individual projects, which were meant to be someone was interested in a technology or something.
That's interesting you mentioned it. Is that so the projects were still owned by Google, even if you worked on it yourself? You just decided to work on a project with a team, but it was all owned by Google, so you couldn't just decide to like make your own company and start that project. And
yeah, I don't think that they'd allow you to do that, because you were doing it on their own dime. But then again, I don't know what the requirement. I mean, in the UK, and this is like Mark getting his legal hat on, any work that you do for a company on their time belongs to that company. The IP belongs to that company by default, unless you have a contract. So so kids out there, if you're working on your own idea whilst you're employed, that could belong to the company, whether you like it or not. So
just double check it. Just
double check that. Right? Well, at least that's in the UK. I don't know what's it like in Australia.
The thing I would like to add here is that the burnout usually isn't always caused because of working long hours, right? So people can still burn out even if working normal hours. So the general mood and feel in the company is also one of the important factors here. There's a lot of story of people burning out just because they were, micromanaged and things like that. So
uncertainty is a very big cause of burnout, which is when there's a lot of change in direction in projects, and so when people don't know what they're going to be doing from one day to the next, it can be very damaging for people.
Yeah, I feel though,
and cause burnout.
Even with uncertainties. If you're working on a game, there's obviously going to be a lot of changes throughout. But I feel like if you got a great leadership, great teams that can sort of manage to sell you that idea, that pitch of that new thing that's been changed, I think that will still can keep the morale, and you can still you might not feel as burned out as then you'd be like, oh no, I worked on this for like 3 months and now we're changing direction, but hey, they gave me a really good reason, I think it sounds great, and hey, it's after all like that's kind of part of the job. So again, I think it depends on, like what Mitja said, it's all about the team and the culture of the company.
But you only get a few of those, right?
I mean, if you keep changing something every month, that might be extreme, right? We're doing a science fiction game. No, we're doing like a super realistic, I don't know, historical. No, wait, what?
We're making Pong, guys. But it's been really interesting talking to you, Mitja. I'm really looking forward to whatever machine games comes out next. And this is not me trying to probe if the... It is absolutely me trying to probe. From what's come out so far has been amazing, and I think I'm going to have to go and spin up a bit of Wolfenstein after this meeting and shoot me some Nazis.
Shooting Nazis is always a good thing.
And that's the best thing that we can end this episode.
Yes.
That's dropping the mic and walking out of the room. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye. The Level Design Podcast has been a Command Studio production. Our editor is Matthew Lever, and this episode has been produced by Bridie Rose.